All right, tonight we're going to have a quick conversation about whether or not you should celebrate Easter. And here's the short answer: no, you should not. You might be asking yourself, though, isn't Easter in the Bible? Well, it's interesting. It is mentioned actually in one place in Acts 12. So let's go over there. Acts 12. And we'll read the first 4 verses here. It says, "Now about the time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James the brother of John with the sword, and because he saw it please the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternarians of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people." So we're going to take a look at this word Easter, and we're going to see if it actually means Easter. So if you're using Blue Letter Bible, which I like to use here, you can click on Tools, and you can get what's called the interlinear. And let's scroll down here to the word Easter. That's in the Strong's G3957, and the word is Pascha. Let's go ahead and click on it and get the meaning of this word. And it means simply the Passover. The meal, the day, the festival, or the special sacrifices connected with it. It does say Easter here. Let's go down to the Strong's. To pass over by sparing. The Septuagint also constantly used the Chaldean form, except in 2 Chronicles. Let's go down here. The Paschal sacrifice, which was accustomed to be offered for the people's deliverance of old from Egypt, or 2, the Paschal lamb. So this has very much to do with the Passover. And we can see that from the word. Again, let's go back and take a look at the spelling of it here. Pascha. So this word really just means the Passover. And if you look at other translations, that's actually what it says. So the King James Version decided to put Easter in there because eventually Christians started to celebrate Easter. But let's take a look at Easter a little bit closer here and see, does it actually have anything to do with the Bible? At this point, you might be asking yourself, who really cares? If I want to celebrate Easter, maybe I'll celebrate Easter, even though we can't find it anywhere in the Bible. You can't actually find in the Bible any documented occurrences where anyone celebrated Easter in either the Old Testament or during Christ's time, or even after that in Acts or in the epistles. You just don't see it in the Bible. So again, you might be thinking, well, who really cares? Well, let's take a look at another verse here. We'll take a look at Mark 7. And we'll read in verse 6, it says, this is Christ speaking here, "He answered and said to them, Well has Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups and many other such things you do. And he said to them, Full well you reject the commandment of God that you may keep your own tradition." So if you're familiar with the gospel accounts, you probably know already that Christ did a lot of condemning of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but you can see here specifically in Mark 7, he's calling them out because of their own traditions. He said, "You reject the commandment of God and instead hold to the traditions of men." And that's what Easter is. Easter is ultimately a tradition of men. You can go online, you can do your own research, and I encourage you to go do that and to dig deep. There are some things out there that's certainly misinformation. You might see connections with Easter and the Babylonian god Ishtar. In recent years, it's come to light that connection was spurious. It's not actually a connection at all, but there are connections to other pagan gods and just generally traditions of men ultimately. And again, if we can't find Easter in the Bible and we want to please God, if that's our aim and our purpose in life, then why are we celebrating this day? And we can take a look at some of these articles that I found online just last night when I was taking a look to kind of refresh my memory on some of these things. This is a Britannica article entitled "Easter, Origin, Christianity, Jesus Traditions." So you can go online, look that up yourself. I just made a couple of highlights here. The English word Easter, which parallels the German word Ostern, is of uncertain origin. One view expounded by the Venerable Bede in the 8th century was that it derived from Uster or Ustare, an Anglo-Saxon goddess possibly associated with spring and fertility. So again, just a cursory look so far that we've done. let's look at a couple other articles here that I found. This next one I found kind of interesting. This is from the Library of Congress from a gentleman who apparently is somewhat of an expert on folklore, and it's called Ostara and the Hare. Not ancient, but not as modern as some skeptics think. So let's take a look at this one here. Again, I made a couple of highlights. This is an interesting article. He kind of goes into the depths here of looking at the research and what the connections are to Easter. But again, what you won't see here is a connection to the first century church. We'll get to those verses in a minute, but you won't see anything from the Bible, which is interesting. And we'll get to it later, but God has his own holy days that he wants us to keep. But let's take a look at this one here. So this one's called, again, Ostara and the Hare, not ancient, but not as modern as some skeptics think. Ostara herself is a shadowy figure in Germanic folklore. Her story begins with Ustare, an early medieval English goddess who is not documented from pagan sources at all, and turns up only in early Christian sources, the writings of the English Churchman Bede. My question would be, well, who is this Bede, and does he or she, I don't actually know, have the authority to overturn anything that God has laid out in his holy scriptures? Let's keep going here. Here's a note from H. Krebs in the first volume of the English journal Folklore in 1883. This is a citation here. Easter eggs and the hare. Some time ago, the question was raised how it came that according to South German still prevailing folklore, the hare is believed by children to lay Easter eggs. I venture now to offer a probable answer to it. Originally, the hare seems to have been a bird, which the ancient Teutonic goddess Ustara, the Anglo-Saxon Easter or Uster, as Bede calls her, transformed into a quadruped, so four-legged animal, I guess, for the reason the hare, in grateful recollection of its former quality as bird and swift messenger of the spring goddess, is able to lay eggs on her festival at Easter time. So from what we can see, at least from the research that I've done, and you can do the same thing online, there's connections here to basically Germanic folklore. So maybe not as ancient as a tradition as maybe some might think, but nonetheless still traditions of men. And we saw that Christ condemned keeping the traditions of men in favor of keeping the commandments of God. And I've just got one more article we'll take a look at. You might be interested in doing a little bit of research on some of the symbols and different things that are connected with Easter. This article is titled, "This is the Real Reason Why We Dye Eggs for Easter," and it appeared in a Parent article by Liz Regalia. Let's take a look at that. For over 3,000 years, so this is an interesting one here, the colored eggs or the symbology of the eggs certainly predates Christianity. So for over 3,000 years, the egg has been celebrated as a symbol of fertility and associated with the regeneration of our earth each spring. Just like warmer spring weather sets flowers in bloom, the egg promises new life in nature. This link is why Easter isn't the only spring holiday involving eggs or even the first. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe I'll start to learn about the holy days that God has laid out in his word, and, I'll just keep keeping Easter because I've been doing my whole life and it's comfortable. Well, God actually warns against that. So let's take a look here at Deuteronomy 12. Scroll down to verse 29. It says, when the eternal your God shall, and the eternal is a good translation for Lord, by the way, when you see it all capitalized like that. Again, if you look into the Hebrew. When the eternal your God shall cut off the nations from before you, where you go to possess them, and you succeed them, and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you be not snared by following them after that they be destroyed from before you, and that you inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. You shall not do so unto the eternal your God, for every abomination to the eternal, which he hates, have they done unto their gods, for even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. So here we see that God is very specific when he told the Israelites when they were coming into the promised land that he was bringing them into to not learn the way of the heathen. So don't get into those traditions that men have set up, but rather obey me and listen to my voice and do the things that I have commanded you. We can see that also in Deuteronomy 12, verse 32. It says, "What things soever I command you, observe to do it. You shall not add thereto, nor diminish from it." So again, my question would be, if God has his own holy days that he lays out in the Bible, the same days that Christ kept when he was here on earth, and why wouldn't we celebrate those days? Why would we instead celebrate inventions of men, traditions of men? Let's take a look at some more verses here. Here's where God lays out his holy days. Leviticus 23 and verse 4, "These are the feasts of the eternal, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. In the 14th day of the first month at even is the eternal's Passover." So maybe you've heard about the Passover. Well, God lays it out here in Leviticus 23. In the 14th day of the first month, that's God's holy day calendar. The first month is the month of Abib. He says at the evening time, it's the Passover. "And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto the eternal. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. And the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein, but you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the eternal 7 days. And the 7th day is a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein." Let's look at some more verses here. "And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the eternal throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever." And I'm focusing here on, what we kind of call the spring holy days, so the holy days that occur in the spring. So again, you might already be familiar with the fact that some people celebrate the Passover around the same time of the year that some people celebrate Easter. So I'm going to focus specifically here tonight on the Passover and the days of unleavened bread, because those are the days that occur in the spring, God's holy days in the spring. And notice it says, "You shall keep it throughout your generations." So again, it's interesting to note that Christ kept these days. We'll look at that too. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day, again, we talk about the Feast of Unleavened Bread here. First month, 14th day, a reiteration here, again, about the Passover and the days of unleavened bread. So pretty clear. Let's look at Exodus 23:15. Some more verses here. "You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded you in the time appointed of the month of Abib. For in it you came out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty." Now let's look at some of those verses here that show that Christ kept these days as well. Let's look at Luke 2, verses 41 to 42. "Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover." So it's probably no coincidence. God obviously picked Mary and Joseph for a special purpose to raise, the Son of Man, Christ, our Savior. So they were people that obeyed the commandments of God. So here we see that Mary and Joseph went up to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when Christ was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And then you might know the story where he got left behind. Matthew 26, verse 17. "Now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, Where will you that we prepare for you the Passover? And he said, Go into the city to such a man, and say to him, The master says, My time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples." Again, notice Christ's disciples didn't say, where are we going to get ready for Easter? And do we have the colored eggs ready to go and the bunnies and all that kind of stuff? Nope, they're keeping the Passover. The disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Luke 22, verses 7 to 8. "Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed. And he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare us the Passover, that we may eat." So we can see all throughout the scriptures that God lays out his holy days in the Old Testament. We see that Christ was still keeping those days in the New Testament. And there are other verses as well. Maybe I'll just grab one here real quick. Acts 2:1, when the day of Pentecost was fully come. So, the book of Acts, Christ is already dead by now. And this is the first century church continuing on with how Christ led them when he was on earth. So they're still keeping the holy days. They're keeping the Feast of Pentecost. That's laid out in the Old Testament. Acts 20, verse 6, "And we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came to them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. Acts 20, verse 16, "For Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus, because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost." And Acts 18:21, "But bade them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep this feast that comes to Jerusalem, But I will return again to you if God will, and he sailed from Ephesus. So again, if we can see that Christ kept these days and the apostles kept these days and God laid them all out in the Old Testament as to which days to keep, the question to really ask ourselves then is, why would we instead keep the traditions of men? So just something to think about. Hope you have a good night. Take care.